Kabhaal here. Today we're going to be building a two-story traveling merchant's wagon. This build was made in Minecraft 1.15.2, and building this I used the following mods: Fabric 1.15.2, Fabric API, OptiFabric, Optifine, and the Fabrics mod Extra Pieces for all the different types of slabs, walls, and other non-vanilla pieces I'll be using in this build. This build is achievable with Forge mods that add similar slabs, walls, and other non-vanilla pieces as well, if you don't want to use Fabric. For my textures, I'm using MYTHIC 1.15, and for shaders, I'm using SEUS Renewed 1.0.1. With all that out of the way, let's get on to the build. So, starting out, I wanted to build the wheels of the wagon to see what the size of it was going to be. It can be hard to build wheels in Minecraft because they are a round shape, and Minecraft is all about building with blocks, so my initial build was a bit too big. I finally settled on the design of 4 stairs and 4 half slabs, 2 horizontal and 2 vertical. At that point, I figured I'd make the axle about 5 blocks wide. That would give me enough floor space to make things like counters, but I wanted the shop to be longer than it was wide, as it is going to be a wagon. Since it is going to be a very large wagon, I decided to give it 2 sets of rear wheels, and also add a bit to the fantasy feel of it. I also decided to extend it out a bit, as I felt that my initial guesstimate for the front wheels was a bit too close to the rear ones, and this would give me more space. Also, I use iron blocks to differentiate the center of the wheel from the dark wood outside of the wheel, to add just a bit more color variation in there. I decided not to use trapdoors as floors, it just seemed not to work. So I decided to try and make the fenders first. The fenders are going to add a little bit of accent, a little bit more depth than just a bare side of a wagon. Unfortunately, I realized that I needed to build out the floor of the wagon first, and for lining it I used stairs, yet again to give a little bit more depth. By doing so and adding the starting of the walls, it helped me just get a better feel for what the fenders are going to look like in the end. I also try adding in little accents with wooden walls, like a little bumper in the back, and posts on the side of the coachman's seat that's going to be holding up the canopy that's going to be over it, while also acting as railings. At this point, I'm still using birch for the floor and the walls. It gives me a nice contrast to the dark wood of the wheels, and now I feel comfortable trying to flesh out the fenders and get a feel for what I want them to look like. Unfortunately, I forgot to turn off weather in my creative world, so I was at a real risk of everything just catching on fire and burning down. Moving back to building the fenders, I decided that I do want to use trapdoors in the building of them. I'm just not quite able to find the right balance initially, until I do just stumble upon it with a combination of slabs and stairs. And now that I've got it figured out and looking mostly how I want, it's just a matter of copying it to the other side. At this point, I'm pretty happy with how the fenders look. There is the area in between, and I can't quite seem to place my finger on what I want to do with it quite yet. So I go ahead and I move on to the walls inside of the wagon. While the birch does provide a nice contrast, I think it's a bit too much of a contrast, and I want a bit of a darker, more earthy color, because a lot of my builds do stick to a dark fantasy type of flavor. And as I'm going around and switching out walls and various pieces for stripped oak log, everybody's favorite wandering trader shows up and decides he wants to try and lowball me on buying the wagon from me. With him out of the way, I take a look at how the stripped oak logs look and decide that it's more what I wanted for the wagon, and replace most of the birch that I had put in there previously with it. I also decide to add some fences on the side of the wagon, kind of like luggage racks, and I do once again use wooden walls to make kind of a bumper, and posts that are going to frame the rear entrance, much like how they framed the front coachman's area. Using plank stairs, I'm going to start building the walls up and meshing it in with the posts and supports of both the front and rear entrance. Instead of leaving the floor currently as it is, I decide that I'm going to add another layer of blocks. I also go ahead and I start to detail the front and back entrance. I decide that I'm going to turn the back into sort of a patio area with little fences that will allow you to stand outside but still be on the wagon. I also go ahead and add a little overhang over the coachman's area and use trapdoors to extend it out without making it too thick. Now that I've got the basic shape of the wagon figured out, I kind of want to start and figure out the shape of the roof. Initially I wanted to make it out of purple wool, but much like before how I said I was in risk of having everything burned down from lightning, I decided to use purple concrete instead. Just so if I do copy and paste it into a world later on, I don't have to worry about storms. I'm going for more of a cylindrical shape instead of your normal angular roof shape. I used the stripped wood walls that I've used in other places of the build to both tie the roof in with the rest of the build and also make it look like it's got just that little bit of extra support. And speaking of support, I take regular stripped wooden blocks and use them to make a central support beam running down the middle of the roof. I experiment with using tracks or even trapdoors to try and maybe break up the roof a little bit, but it's just not turning out how I want, so ultimately abandoned the idea. Instead, I come up with the idea to make the middle portion of the wagon an actual second story. This will break up both the profile of the roof and the wagon itself, adding just a bit more complexity to the shape of it. With that being said, I go ahead and I try to finish off both the front and rear entrances of the wagon and experiment with where I'm going to hang lanterns to try and light it up, because I really like the idea of the wagon trundling along with lanterns swaying. Also starting on the sides of the wagon, I use vertical half slabs to set out where I want to put windows that are going to be made out of trapdoors. As I look at it, I decide that instead of just wanting to have more of a raised roof that's going to have a covered second story area, I want windows that I can be able to look out of while I'm sitting in the second story of the wagon. With that in mind, I go ahead and put some windows on the front as well, so the light from the lanterns can be viewed not only from the sides, but from either end as well. With that idea fleshed out, I go ahead and I start to try and figure out the walls for that second story. Looking at how I've got it set up on the first story, I decided to try and copy that a little bit, but add a little bit of a twist to it, deciding to add in triple one-high windows with trapdoors acting as walls. Being pretty happy with how it turned out, I go ahead and I copy it to the other side, and I think it looks really good. Now it's just a matter of finishing off the roof on the second story. And sticking with the style I've already established, I go ahead and add in the stripped log central beam. Ultimately deciding to change it out for something a bit darker than what I was previously using. Adding in a few lanterns to make sure we don't have any unwelcome guests spawning on the ledges. And just doing a few touch-ups here and there. I go ahead and I add some arches on the inside to break up the shape of it a little bit more so it doesn't just look like a box. And add in some spaces to add some windows that point to either end on the second story. Utilizing trapdoors, I cover up the stripped wooden walls and make a nice transition up into the arches that I had previously made. Now I start work on the second story floor. I know I want to use stairs and slabs to make the outer edges of it. I wind up going with iron because I've used it in other places in the build, but I haven't used it a lot, and I feel like it adds just a little bit of extra flair to what's going to be a living quarters area. I try and make the entire floor out of trapdoors, but it proves to be a bit finicky, so I decide to make the middle row out of actual slabs. I remove one of the trapdoors in the corner, add a ladder for easy access, and now I can go up and down whenever I want. And that's it. That's how you build your very own 2-story traveling merchant's wagon. Here's a look at how I decorated the inside of mine. I'll be excited to see how others take this build and run with it and add their own twists and flares to it. Did you like this build? Would you want to see more? Leave me a comment below about some things you'd like to see me put my own twist on. Or, if you used this build and put your own twist on it, hit me up on Twitter or Instagram. I'd love to see what you've done with it. I'm Kabhaal, and I hope you have a great day.